Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 91, Ticks, Lyme Disease, and Are You at Risk? With special guest, Dr. Alan Eaton. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hey, this is Dr. Carl Miller, and you're listening to my favorite hunting podcast on the internet, the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Hey, this is Lamar Smith from Brush Country Monsters and the Novilles Ranch here in South Texas. And you are listening to my favorite podcast, the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Hey, this is Jeff Schmitz from Big Game Logic, and you're listening to my number one podcast on the internet, the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Jay Scott, your host of the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm joined with a couple of big buck deer hunters in the studio today. I've got Dusty Phillips from Ohio. How you doing, Dusty?
I'm doing awesome, man.
Awesome. And we got Randy Gagne, a repeat visit to the Big Buck Studios, which, I sent the limo out. Actually, I didn't. He lives across the road. But I was thinking about sending the limo because there's so much traffic at 7 o'clock at night.
I may have taken you up on that, too.
Okay.
I probably should next time.
If you need a ride home, let me know.
I will do that.
We'll drive across my driveway into your driveway.
It sounds good.
We have a great show today, and it's a topic that Randy is very up on because you suffered from Lyme disease, and it's something that we've been talking about doing a show on because there's so many people, specifically in New England and parts of New York, that have encountered this type of stuff, but it's become more prominent in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, all the big tracking woods that we encounter, and lots of us are turkey hunters too. Dusty, not so much in Ohio, but we wanted to bring some awareness to this disease and speak to somebody that actually went through all the process of feeling it and having the awareness and the treatment and all that kind of stuff. And then we actually have an expert coming on today. Alan Eaton from the University of New Hampshire is joining us, and he knows more about ticks. He's forgotten more about ticks than we'll ever know.
Yeah, he knows. He knows a lot about it.
He knows a lot.
Yeah, it's amazing that, doing some research here, how much more tick activity the East Coast has versus, the Midwest.
It is amazing. And we're talking to Alan, and he's going to bring up some points of things about ticks you didn't even consider.
No, there's a lot of things I didn't know about, right. That's for sure.
Right. Ready, let's talk a little bit before we talk to Alan about some of the symptoms that you experienced. What were some of the symptoms that led you to believe, including like the bite mark, that you might have Lyme disease?
I mean, apparently a lot of people don't even get the bullseye or the bite mark. I was one of the lucky ones that did, but I still waited a few weeks before I did anything about it. So the symptoms started as bad headache, for a few days with a fever and what they call brain fog, which is pretty much the inability to concentrate on anything. And then from that point, shooting heart pains, joint pains, and then I came down with a Bell's palsy, which is, facial paralysis. And this was all in a pretty short period of time, of a couple of weeks.
2 weeks, this was all happening.
2 to 3 weeks, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then went downhill from there, and that's while I was on medication. So long process to come out of that.
Gotcha. Now, what kind of treatments did they put you through?
They put me on a drug called doxycycline,
okay.
Which sometimes the cure is worse than the and it ravages your stomach pretty good, but it did the trick. After a few months, I definitely feel a lot better and feel 100% now. But
is that a pill form or something?
It's a pill form,
okay.
Yeah, and it's aggressive, but it does the trick if you catch it early enough.
Gotcha. And it sounds like if you do catch it early enough, you can prevent a lot of it.
Yeah, if you catch
waiting
it,
too long causes the problems.
You know, I'm a guy.
And that's after the bite.
Yeah, I procrastinated, 2 to 3 weeks, way too long.
Gotcha.
You got to catch it before that.
Gotcha. Randy, you're a big outdoorsman, and this situation had nothing to do with being outdoors.
No.
But we all encounter ticks in the outdoors, hunting, fishing, whatever.
Yep.
Not so much fishing. I guess they're not really hanging out on the water.
If you're a bank fisherman,
bank fisherman, though.
Definitely.
Right.
Yep.
Especially in more humid areas, that's for sure.
Yep.
And we thought it would be a great idea to just bring more awareness to if you're starting to feel these symptoms, get there as soon as possible.
Don't mess around.
Before you even get to that stage, just constantly do tick checks once you leave the field.
Yeah.
And that's going to solve 99% of the problems.
Yep.
So before we get to speak to Alan Eaton from the University of New Hampshire, a tick expert and very knowledgeable about Lyme disease, Dusty, I think we need to give a shout-out to a couple of listeners that helped us out this week.
Yeah, absolutely. We started the donation page, and that's bigbuckregistry.com/donate.
Yep, and we had a couple of donations come up this week. One, I'd like to thank Jim Keller for his donation. He thank you so much to everybody. Just every little penny goes a long way. Chris Hunsberger sent in a nice donation, and Chris, I can't thank you enough. It's really helping us out. And our good buddy Griff Botte also sent us a donation to help us fund the show. And you wouldn't necessarily, we've been funding the show with our own money for quite a long time. So we're trying to, now that we've got some content that we feel really strong about, we want to keep it going. We want to bring better shows to you each and every single week. And we're just asking that if you have $1, $2, $50, $100, whatever it is, we don't want you to send in anything if you can't afford it. That is the last thing we want, because we know times are tough out there, and we don't want your money if you can't afford it. But if you have a couple extra bucks, we could certainly use it to help fund the show, keep it going, pay for our hosting costs. There are costs associated with the show, and we've been dishing it out with our own money for a couple of years now. And we're just looking for a little help in return. And if you like the show and you have an extra buck, hey, we're happy to take it and put it towards a good cause and spreading the message that hunting is good.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
Ultimately, that's what we're here for. Hunting is a good thing.
Very good thing.
Yep. So, Dusty, would you second that?
Absolutely, and we thank you to the ones that's donated, and we look forward to the ones that will in the future. And, it's much appreciated by Jay and myself, and we look forward to bringing you a new episode every week.
Exactly. And we can go out and find great people like Alan Eaton to listen, and so we can listen to him and tell us his whole story. And without the great listeners on the other side of this, the followers on Facebook, the listeners, the downloads, it would be pointless. But because we have so many listeners, because we have so many fans on Facebook, we can go to these great people and say, hey, we have a way to spread a message, a word, something great about hunting, or some, in this case, Lyme disease, to help you as the listener try to prevent it. And it's basically just sharing knowledge.
Yeah, this podcast is going to probably save a lot of people, from dealing with that disease.
Getting sick, definitely.
Yeah.
And maybe from dying.
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
Because it can cause death. So let's get Alan on the line here, because I'm kind of anxious to hear what he has to say about ticks and Lyme disease and relative to your situation, Randy.
Let's do it.
Alan Eaton, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you.
Wow, well, that's great, man. I'm glad you're joining us. And I've got Dusty Phillips from Ohio. I've got Randy Gagne, my neighbor, and Bowtech, and he worked with you on some projects, I understand.
Yeah,
so it's good to meet with you, fellas. Good.
Alan works at our deer registration station and checks for ticks and stuff. So.
Excellent. Well, this is the Tick and Lyme disease show, and it's one of those subject matters that you kind of hear about but don't think about, but we thought we'd shed some light on it, specifically because Randy actually had a situation not too long ago where he actually had the disease, right, Randy?
Yeah. Last summer I got it, and I've been around ticks my whole life and never been bit. Right. But this one got me.
I've been around ticks my whole life too. I've got ticks on me all the time.
Yeah.
I've been bitten by ticks, but I didn't come down with Lyme disease. But I know it's a major topic, Alan. You're an expert in this field. We thought we'd pick your brain for a little while, if that's cool.
Well, and of course, I'm an entomologist, so I can answer questions specifically that relate to the vectors and the ecological relationships and things like that. If the questions get into medical area, that's where I'm going to say, well.
Well, that's when we're going to turn to Randy for experience.
Yeah.
But we're not going to try to be medical doctors today, but we are going to try to understand how it all gets passed around, why it's here, how it can affect deer herds, people, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's your forte, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, that's one area I know a little bit about anyway.
Beautiful. All right. So, Alan, tell us about who you are. Where are you from? How'd you get into studying ticks and that kind of stuff?
Well, I'm an entomologist here with the UNH Cooperative Extension, and since 1978, I've been coordinating Cooperative Extension's pest management program. And most of that is dealing with agricultural pests and trying to help people to manage them more efficiently and stop just throwing chemicals at them. But the same procedures work for other kinds of pests, and it became clear in the mid and late 1980s that we were having more and more problems here with ticks, and we had no publications, we had nobody studying this, we had nobody answering questions. So I tried a bit to see where that expertise could be found, and I ended up writing the publication myself on it, and then starting applied research, extension work, for example, to figure out where black-legged tick occurs in New Hampshire and where it's abundant. So that work started about 89 or so. Okay. 87 to 89. And I've been working on it off and on ever since. And since that time, the populations have been getting, of that tick anyway, getting higher and higher and higher and higher in our state, and more and more and more people are becoming victims.
Alan, when I was a younger man, I think even in high school, it seemed like where we talked about ticks the most was mostly about, I want to say like around Long Island or Fire Island down in New York.
Yeah.
How does that relate to the population in New Hampshire right now? Is that connected at all? It always seemed to be like the hot spot for Lyme disease until recently.
Well, when the disease was first identified, in fact, it was identified. It was given its name because of the city of Old Lyme that sits right at the mouth of the Connecticut River in Connecticut, and so that was the region where it was the most common at that particular time around that area. So we're talking about Connecticut, northern New York, and so forth, Rhode Island, coastal Massachusetts. And that was the focus at the time. But the tick has spread in abundance, and the disease has spread as well. And our state, until recently, when we lost our crown, our state was the state that had the highest incidence of Lyme disease in the entire country. So the incidence, in other words, the number of CDC measures is by the number of reported cases for every 100,000 people that live in that state. And we were number one. But recently, late this fall, CDC posted the 2013 data, and we got knocked out of first place by our neighbors. So Vermont is now the state with the highest incidence in the country.
No kidding.
And New Hampshire is number 2, and Maine is number 3.
Wow.
No kidding. So why do they fluctuate like that? What is there? Is it a population of ticks thing? Is it just better counting? What's the situation there?
There's a whole lot of things that enter into this. And, of course, it's the number of, here's the big word, reported cases of the disease that appear. And, of course, there's not all the cases get reported. So the number of cases that get reported can be affected by a number of things. And it can also be affected by the fact that the number of people getting sick goes up or down. So that goes up and down, and it always fluctuates here and there a bit year to year. And the tick populations are fluctuating a bit when we get bad conditions for ticks, droughts and things like that. The numbers go down. We have fewer cases for a while, then they build right back up again. So we see a number of things that cause variations in the number of cases that get reported. I'm convinced that the reason that New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont are I have to say it the other way. Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine are numbers 1, 2, and 3 in the incidence nationally, and that isn't Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New York or Massachusetts like used to be, is because the people down there that have been living this for all these years get it now, and a high percentage of them practice preventative behaviors, things that you can do to reduce your risk of being a victim. And up here is an awful lot of us who don't, and therefore we become victims. I think that's the major factor.
I want to get into that in a sec and explore that a little bit more, like their behaviors, the preventative measures. Randy, walk us through a little bit about your experience. How did you first come in contact with what you thought was Lyme disease?
I actually never found the tick. Did have a little small red rash on me, but being a guy, it's a bug bite or whatever. And probably about 3 weeks later, it turned into a pretty good sized bullseye, and then the symptoms started.
Okay. Just for people listening to the show, Randy is my neighbor, and he lives a stone throw away from my driveway. And you've been on the show before. You were on the Bowtech, not the Bowtech, the brand, but a Bow technician. We did a show, I think it was episode 15 or so. Yep. And Randy tunes my bow, and he's a outdoorsman,
outside all the time.
All the time. I see it. I very rarely see you not outside.
And I'm quite certain that I got the tick in my yard.
Gotcha.
So not that far away.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Alan a question here real quick.
Sure.
Tell us the definition of Lyme disease.
The case definition I can't tell you. I'd have to look up a manual and see. It varies a little bit, but in order to be written down in the record books as an official case, you have to the patient has to present with a certain set of symptoms, and they have to have tests that have certain results. And I can't exactly tell you what it is. But for a layperson, basically it's a disease caused by a spirochete, that's a corkscrew-shaped bacterium, that has maybe learned isn't the right way, but has evolved to survive in our bodies, which are very well defended, and it survives in places where our immune system has a hard time reaching it, synovial fluid and joints and skin and places like that. And it causes a wide range of symptoms, from mild to really bad, and occasionally death.
And Alan, I'm a graduate of the University of New Hampshire, and my major was microbiology. So I actually understand what you mean when you say spirochete. And there's another spirochete we probably won't talk about on this show, but I understand exactly what you're saying. Randy, what was it like? You said you saw a bullseye. What progressed from there?
It severe headaches, and then a lot of fatigue, and after that it progressed into joint pain, and it wasn't like a specific joint. It would go for different joints every day. And then the worst symptom was I got Bell's palsy from it, which basically paralyzes the right side of your face or left side of your face for quite some time.
Okay.
So it's an ugly thing.
How long were you down and out with this?
Most of the summer, and I was on medication for it, throughout the summer. I caught it early, but still got severe symptoms, and something I would never ever want to have again. Never. It's just debilitating. It takes all your energy, and I mean, people that have it for years and years, it's bad news.
Do you still feel symptoms of it today?
Nothing. No.
It's gone.
No, I got treated, and I feel 100% now.
Okay.
But definitely never want to do that again.
And how often, I mean, as an outdoorsman, as we're all outdoorsmen, I'm always checking for ticks, like constantly. What?
I agree with Alan 100% on this, because I did to a point, but
okay.
Where this tick was under my arm, and so tiny. I never saw it, but our cat occasionally comes in with them around her eyes, and they
Sasquatch.
Oh yeah, that's her.
I named Randy's cat Sasquatch.
But I mean, she's in the woods all the time, and these things are so tiny. If they were in your hair, you'd never see them. They're just minuscule.
Gotcha. Quick side note: Sasquatch was. I had my game camera out, and for about a week and a half, I didn't get a single picture of a deer or anything. But I had Sasquatch like 25 times.
Yeah, she's a mini bobcat.
She is. She's out there all the time.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, Alan, let's get back to the preventative measures that you described that were in New York, Rhode Island, that kind of thing. What did the people of those states start to do differently to reduce the numbers down there?
Well, I'll give you an example. We performed down in Mystic, not last year, but the year before last. And before our concert, I went to a local wildlife center with my binoculars, and I was going to do some bird watching for a while. And I went there, and there were signs warning people about ticks. That's one thing you see in a few places in New Hampshire that are infested. So there's one. And I saw two people going in, and they stopped at the entrance. They parked their car. They went around towards the entrance, and then tucked their pant legs into the socks, and then walked out. And then I saw a couple that were there in the distance coming out, and they had come from a different entrance, and they stopped, and they took a can of insect repellent, and they sprayed it around their ankles and lower legs. These are examples of the kinds of things that you do to reduce the likelihood. Now, but I think the one thing that people do that I don't get to see, I'm guessing they do, that is the most important is checking yourself daily for ticks during tick season. And yes, it means you got to remove your clothing. And if you don't have a significant other one to help you look at your back, for example, you can't see, then you got to set up mirrors and bright lights and so forth and use a handheld mirror. But if you do this, these are examples of things that will tremendously reduce the risk of getting one of these things. You have to, if you don't have many freckles on your skin and you're light-skinned like I am, even the adults are easy to spot. The males are 2 millimeters long, the females are 3, but the nymphs are the tough ones, and they're only 1 millimeter in length, and they're hard to spot, and they're hard to feel when they're walking on you. So it's especially important to do this protective behavior, and the daily tick check is part of my routine now. I do this especially during the riskiest times, and the time of year when I stop my tick work and will not do any of it because it's too dangerous for me is from about May 12th or so until July 5th, 6th, 8th, something like that.
Why is that the most dangerous time?
Well, I live alone. I don't have anybody to help me check myself for ticks. So that's when the nymphs are active. The nymphs are the tiny stages. Most of the cases are spread by nymphs because they're so tiny people don't see them. And if you can check yourself every day and remove any ticks that you find, you can't become a victim of Lyme disease because the tick, if it's a nymph that bites you, of course it has to be the right species and it has to be infected. But then in addition to that, it's got to bite you, in the case of a nymph, a minimum of 24 hours. A minimum of 24 hours before it can begin to transmit the agent. If it's an adult, 30 to 36 hours. So if you can remove any ticks that are on you daily, then you can't become a victim of one of these.
Interesting. Alan, have you ever been bitten by a tick?
I'm bitten dozens of times every year.
Okay.
There's always a few that get through. I'm an example of somebody who is at the highest risk of anybody you can think of. I do sampling for ticks and go into the thickest, most tick-ridden places because I have to, because somebody's got to do it. And usually I remove them long before there's any problem, but once in a while one gets through my defenses and I get through the initial stages of Lyme disease like any other person would.
Interesting. So you may actually have or have had Lyme disease before?
I've had it twice, and but I follow my own recommendations. And the moment the early symptoms show, you call up. I called up my physician, And the person answering the phone that does triage, I identified myself, and I said, "And what's the reason you want to see the doctor today?" And I said, "Well, I want to make an appointment because I think I may have Lyme disease. I'm pretty sure." And there was this long silence at the end of the phone, and she stammered, "But you're the expert."
Right.
But I did what I'm supposed to do. As soon as the first symptoms appeared, after I'd had a bite, I checked with my physician and followed through.
Okay. So,
which is what I didn't do.
You didn't do that.
I didn't do that, and I paid for it.
Okay. So if you don't,
good advice.
You don't get there soon enough. What's the time frame again, Alan?
The most significant risk is from about May 10th or 12th. Well, here in New Hampshire, May 10th or 12th through about July 8th or 10th. But that's not the only risky time. That's just the riskiest time. The adults are active spring and fall. So to me, turkey hunters and bird watchers, May is a great month for both of those things. Boy, those are risky things to do. You've got to be very careful. Deer hunting, less of a concern because the adults are what's active at that time. They're easier to spot. You've got to still follow the rules, but a little less risky.
Okay. So I could be bit by a nymph in May. And does that pose a problem?
Again, the amount of risk. Are you a gambling guy? Now, tell me, Jay.
Yeah, a little bit.
It could. See, you've got some odds here, depending on where you are. In different parts of the state, the ticks, the X's showed different rates of infestation of this spirochete. In fact, I turned 990 ticks into the state this morning for testing for a bunch of pathogens, and we're going to soon find geographically what the picture is now. But there are some parts of the state where the percentage of black-legged ticks that are infested with this particular agent is relatively low. Carroll County is one example of that. And there are other places where it's relatively high, like Rockingham County and Hillsborough and Cheshire. And so there's one thing. And the second thing is, so that tells whether or not that particular tick might be infected or not. And then, of course, if it's a nymph, the chances of it being infected are less than an adult. The figures on the tick testing and the percentage of ticks that show these, which by the way you can look at on Health and Human Services website, you can look at the map and see, those are based on adults. So as an adult, if an adult bites you, Jay, you're going to present your arm and offer this thing to bite you. That adult has had 2 chances in its lifetime to pick up the spirochete. It could have picked it up as a larva when it fed on a bird or a mouse or something, or it could have picked it up as a nymph feeding on a mouse or medium-sized mammal or something. If it's a nymph, it's only had 1 chance already to have picked up the spirochete in its life, and it picks it up by feeding on an infected reservoir host. So the nymphs have got a lower percentage of infestation than the adults do. A lower percentage of them have them. But then, of course, since they're smaller, that means they're a little quicker to spread it, and they're a lot harder to spot. So the odds of those things are different between nymphs and adults.
Gotcha. So the tick itself has to eat or bite something else that has the spirochete in it in order for it to become infected itself.
Yes, but it's even more complicated. It has to bite an infected reservoir host. For example, deer don't seem to get Lyme disease, from what I understand. I suppose if we could interview a deer and ask how it was feeling, how are you feeling today?
Right.
Maybe they'd say, oh, God, I'm headachy. Oh, gosh, who knows? But by looking at the pathology, it appears that they don't seem to show symptoms, and they seem to be living with this without any problem. On the other hand, dogs show swollen joints and lameness and so forth. Cats, equines, cattle, people. So organisms differ in their responses. A reservoir host is a host where, when it gets the disease, the spirochete, or whatever the organism happens to be, in this case it's the spirochete, builds up to a significantly high level in its blood. And that doesn't happen in people. People can get very sick, but you never find the spirochete in the blood. So in order to pick up the disease, it has to feed on something like an infected white-footed mouse, which is an excellent reservoir host. A robin is a pretty good reservoir host, and there's several others as well. Eastern chipmunk is moderately good. And each of these, if they've got the disease, the spirochete builds up to a significant level in the blood, high enough that when that tick bites that infected host, now in addition to getting a blood meal, it's getting the spirochete along with it.
How does
make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. So it's like you have to have a certain concentration for it to be effective, but it has to be hanging out.
And that explains why the adults, there's a higher chance that they're going to be infected versus the nymphs.
Right. Now, how does it actually build up in the bloodstream in some of these reservoirs? How do they? Why does it build up like that? Why doesn't it just not like in humans or deer?
I think that's a question you have to ask a veterinarian or a wildlife pathologist.
Okay.
I could guess, but I don't know the answer.
All right. What's your guess?
Different organisms have different immune systems. Okay. In humans, when an organism gets in the bloodstream, man, the immune system goes after it, and protective systems. And some organisms have different immune systems, and so the organism can survive in that situation better. That's one of my guesses.
Gotcha. Now, Randy tells me you hang out at a lot of deer check stations looking for ticks. Are deer good vectors transporting the ticks around?
Pretty good. I do. The reason I look at deer, and we did this fall again, is that in areas of low tick abundance, for example, Coos County, we focused on Coos and Grafton this time. You can go to an area and I can flag with my flagging cloth for hours and hours and hours and hours. And in fact, I did with my flagging cloth and didn't uncover any ticks. I did 8 towns in Coos County and put in hours and hours of work, didn't come up with a single tick. And it was the right time when I should have been out. Couldn't find any black-legged ticks. But when we sat at checking stations and looked at, let me think, we looked at a total of, 20 animals this time in Coos County, I think, something like that. We ended up coming up with 2 black-legged ticks. So any ticks, any black-legged ticks that your nice 200-pound buck has encountered in the last week is going to still be on it. The last week, maybe even as long as the last 10 days, it's still going to be on that deer when you put a bullet through its chest and bring it to the check station. So it's a really efficient way. It's been going through and collecting ticks hours and hours and hours for a week or more. And so it's a really efficient way to look. And in fact, we find a much higher, this is a great thing for your listeners, we find a much higher number of ticks on the adult males than we do on the fawns or the does. Now, see if you can guess why.
They must prefer a thicker cover or the same cover.
And of course, we're talking about checking these in the fall. This is when we do it, October and November.
Dusty, what's your guess?
I'm going with higher testosterone level and an odor that attracts.
Randy?
I would think that maybe they're in thicker cover, brushier cover, where the ticks seem to hang out.
I'm going to guess that the fawns and the does clean each other more often than the buck.
And what has been postulated by a number of other workers and makes sense to me is that the behavior is different. In October, in the rut season, when we're leading up to rut, the males are spending a tremendous amount of time traveling and moving around, searching for females and checking things out. And they're moving through and physically encountering a lot more brush as a result. The females and the fawns are not doing this, and they're just doing their normal pattern of feeding and hiding and so forth. And so the difference seems to be that the males are much more active. If you look at other times of the year when they've done this, there's not that difference. But if you look at the fall rutting season, that's what we find. And by the way, we find the same thing on moose. And my colleagues that have looked at elk in the West find the same thing on elk. And so that seems to be the reason. And we certainly found it here. We find a significantly higher incidence on that. Where's my data? Significantly higher incidence on the adult males than we do on the others.
Fascinating.
In fact, we've also seen changes when I look at the data. You want to hear some data from a few years back?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
From 1991, let's see, where are we? In 1991, that was the last time we did a major study at deer stations. We looked at 525 animals across the state, and the average and the percentage of animals statewide, the average that had a black-legged tick on it was 2%. So 2 out of every 100, we could find a black-legged tick, one or more. 2.4 was the actual percentage. When I look at the data from combined 2013 and 2014, it's 75%. 75% now statewide. So a big change. When you look at the number of ticks per animal, it's different. It was 3/100ths of a tick in 1991. That's the statewide average. In 2013, it was 5.67. Where's the data from 2014? 5.97. Oh, that's averaging of both years. So what a big difference. 5.97 ticks per animal these last 2 years versus 3/100ths of a tick in 1991. Big differences. And there's some counties that went from 0% to 100% showing up on the deer. So it's a really efficient way for us to find out what's going on.
Right. Oh.
And it's also a great way to educate hunters. We created some traffic jams at a couple of places because so many people were trying to get us to answer questions. It slowed down processing the animals at the check station.
Right,
but so it serves a couple of functions. We gather data and we educate people, and we raise their awareness. A couple of hunters were surprised when I picked legged ticks off their camo covers or legs or something.
Interesting. So here's the obvious question: why are there more ticks, or are there more ticks overall? I'm assuming that means that there's more ticks than before. What is the reason for that?
The black-legged tick numbers have been building up over years, and we can't say definitively. In order to really be absolutely certain, we'd have to go back in who was it that had the Wayback Machine in the cartoon show? We'd have to go back in the Wayback Machine and dial the year back to maybe 1900 or something.
Sure.
And if we do that, you look around, you look at photos from that time, from 1900 in much of New Hampshire. New Hampshire was largely pastures. There was large areas that lacked forests. Ticks, black-legged tick, and others do really, really poorly when you have pastures that are grazed by animals. They don't have enough cover. They do really well in thick brush and tall grass. So we may have destroyed the native populations and knocked them way, way down when we cut down the forests and put sheep all over the place in much of New Hampshire way back around the turn of the century. And then slowly, as those forests grew back and changed, I think what's happening is the ticks are reclaiming the territory they used to have. But we don't have tick records that go back that far. We don't have samples from back that far. So that part we're just guessing on. That's what we need the way back for.
Gotcha.
So when they perfect that, I want them to let me know, and I want to go back and answer that question.
Yeah, I'd like to way back machine too. I'm not sure I'm going to go back
so
and
I
check
think
ticks, but I'll do that.
So I think what they're doing is they're filling niches. They're filling vacant territory. We've made changes in the environment that's perfect for ticks. Instead of solid forest now, we've got edge, a little bit of forest and a little house, and a little bit of forest and another house. It's perfect for black-legged ticks. Gotcha. Things like that we've changed, and they're just building back and filling up this territory that's perfect for them now. We've created these changes that have made it really favorable for them.
There's something that, I hear all the time in the stores. Guys come in and they say, well, I got a tick on me, but it's just a wood tick. Now, can a wood tick carry Lyme disease, or is that not possible?
It's possible, and of course, if we're talking about somebody in New Hampshire, there is no wood tick. Wood tick is a species that occurs west of the Mississippi River, but we have American dog tick, which looks almost identical to wood tick. That's usually what they mean.
Yeah.
That species, it is possible for it to have the spirochete in its body. So yes, it could, and sometimes we even have people to go ahead and test them. But I say, why bother? Do you just want to know? Because that species is incapable, I'll say that word twice. It is incapable of transmitting the organism to what it bites. So even if it had it in its body, it cannot transmit it. You have to have the right species. So who cares if you've got if you've got an American dog tick, other than the yuck factor. Yeah. Here in our state, they don't spread diseases. A little farther south, they're involved in a couple of diseases, but up here, no.
I want to get back to that in a second, Alan, if we could. But Dusty, I want to kind of pick your brain a little bit. We're talking about how the landscape of New Hampshire has kind of brought back the ticks since the 1900s, where we used to be a lot of fields, and that seems to probably destroy the cover, and that's the hypothesis. Dusty's out in Ohio. The place that he lives in, there are very few tree areas, but there are tons of fields, corn, soybeans, all that kind of stuff. Dusty, do you have what you would say is a tick problem, or is it just something you guys don't think about that much in Ohio?
Yeah, we do. Obviously walking the fields, you don't run into a tick issue, but as soon as you hit the timber, you run into the tick issue. Gotcha.
And how many ticks do you get on you if you go out there?
At one time I've had 5. I've found 5 at one time. Early spring, either shed hunting, end of April, 1st of May, we get into morel mushroom hunting. Yep. That's when we find quite a few ticks. It's nothing to go for an hour walk and for sure have one on you.
Okay. Alan, does that surprise you at all that there's ticks out in the Ohio area where there's just a lot of fields and flatland?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. Remember, in our state, we have about 15 or 16 species of ticks. You and I have only talked about 2 of them today. We haven't talked about all the others. And there's a number that are out there. If you look at black-legged tick, Ohio doesn't seem to be a state that has very many of those. And in fact, it's I just looked up on the chart. In terms of the incidence, it's has one of the lowest incidences of this disease reported in the country. Not the lowest, but amongst the lowest ones.
So is it safe to say that New England has the highest risk of all parts of the country?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think it's doubly risky because more and more of us are out there hunting or bird watching or doing other stuff outside and are not aware that we need to take charge of this risk. And as a result, since we don't look, we put ourselves at greater risk. Additionally, in places where physicians don't see quite as many cases, the physicians aren't as quick to think of Lyme disease as the possible cause of the muscle aches and the fever and the headaches and so on. It can be difficult to diagnose, especially if you don't remember that you were bitten. So there's another risk as well. So people at the edge, the chance of getting it is lower, but the chance of correctly identifying the disease is much, much, much lower too. So that's another problem.
Gotcha. Fascinating.
Our ticks here are like ladybugs on you. They're monsters.
And I think you have American dog tick, which is the one that you were calling a wood tick, and I think you've also got Lone Star tick, one that has a little bitty white spot. Do you have that one?
That's one I don't recognize.
Okay, it may be that. What county are you in?
Montgomery.
Yeah, and it has to. It's a little bit farther south from there. I'm not quite sure how far north that one goes, but you've got other species as well. That Ohio isn't quite as tick rich, if I can use that term, as New Hampshire might be, but it's still got them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go back to the black-legged tick itself. You said that certain ticks don't have the ability to transfer the spirochete onto the next victim, so to speak.
Right.
What is it that makes the difference with the black-legged tick? Why are they capable of it, but other ticks aren't?
That's a question that the histologists are trying to figure out, but we know the mechanism that's required, and when you know the mechanism that's required in order for it to get transferred, you can figure out where these steps are that cause the problem. Shall I go through that?
I would love to hear that, yeah.
So step number 1 in order to get to one of these diseases is to be bitten by an infected tick of the correct species. And so that's step number 1. You're going to be bitten by let's start even farther back. Step number 1 is the tick, first of all, a larva or a nymph of the correct species, we'll say that in this case it's black-legged tick, has to feed on an infected reservoir host, therefore picking up the spirochete with its blood meal. We talked about that once. So there's step number 1. Step number 2, that particular tick now digests that meal and transforms into the next stage, and this takes weeks and weeks for this to happen. And during that time, the spirochetes, along with the blood meal, are in its GI tract, and the spirochetes begin to multiply within its GI tract. Nothing glamorous about that.
Right.
Step number 3, here's where all the magic occurs, the cellular magic. When that same tick feeds again, and of course this may be weeks or months later, it finally is lucky enough, it finds Jay, and Jay offers his arm, and the tick gladly sticks its mouth parts in. The spirochetes multiply more within the gut, and then they do an amazing thing. They penetrate from inside the gut, and they penetrate the gut wall directly into the blood of the tick. Now, in insects and ticks, the gut is kind of floating in blood. So once it penetrates through the gut, it's in the blood. But to be able to penetrate the gut wall, there's one trick. And it may be that stuff in the genus Ixodes, like black-legged tick, has the right kind of gut that it can actually get through. So this is step 1. And then the second step is it moves in the blood until it reaches the salivary glands, where it actually penetrates into the salivary glands. All this time the tick has been injecting saliva into the host, and now once the spirochetes reach the salivary gland and penetrate into the salivary gland, the tick starts secreting spirochetes as well as the saliva. So those 2 critical steps, it may be that the histology, the cellular structure of Ixodes scapularis and a couple other species of Ixodes, in Europe it's Ixodes rhinosus that can do this. On the West Coast it's Ixodes pacificus. There's something about the gut physiology that the spirochete can actually penetrate through, and there's something about the salivary gland structure that allows it to penetrate to. And I'm guessing that it's different enough in other species of ticks that it just can't do these 2 feats. And that explains why certain species can do it and others can't. Here in our state, we think 99% of the cases, maybe more, are spread by black-legged tick. There's one other tick called Ixodes murus. It's not very common. It tends to be somewhat coastal in its distribution, not too far from the coast, maybe as far as 30 miles inland or so. And that one occasionally has the ability to transmit the organism. That's been proven by my colleagues at the Maine Medical Center Research Group. And so we've got 2 species here that can do this, but one of them is not very common at all. If we were in the Pacific coast, we'd be talking about Ixodes pacificus. And if you and I were in Germany, we'd be talking, or Scotland, we'd be talking about Ixodes rhinosus, which is what spreads it over there. Okay. So all of the ones that spread it all over the world are all in the genus Ixodes, and there are only certain species of Ixodes. And there's something about the physiology that makes it that they can do this, but others can't.
Interesting. I was just going to use the word physiology. So it has everything to do with the physiology of the way it just spreads throughout the tick itself. It's not just... It
seems to, and that seems to explain why the others can't do it. And I believe in Sam Telford's lab and in others, they've repeatedly tried to get other species to transmit it, like the American dog tick and others. And repeatedly, when tests have been attempted, it has failed to transmit it. So it's not only that we can't find other species spreading them, like American dog tick, but when they try in the lab, they still can't get it to do it.
Okay, gotcha. Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll speak to Alan Eaton a little bit more, and we'll open up a little bit about how to prevent getting Lyme disease, and I'm sure Alan's going to open up with all kinds of other interesting tidbits of information to help us prevent Lyme disease and probably just more about tick stuff in general. So when we come back, Alan Eaton. Hey, Dusty.
Yeah.
You know what I do when I'm feeling a little down about my bow?
I may know what you do.
What do I do?
You go to Morris's.
Morris's Sporting Goods. And you know
no
why?
Kidding, was I really right?
You nailed it. And you know why? Because you've met Jim Morris.
Yeah, absolutely. Great people.
Great people. He is dedicated to the outdoors. He's dedicated to making sure he has the highest quality products in his store. And on top of that, he has the highest quality bow technicians working there. And we happen to have the bow technician right now from Morse's Sporting Goods talking to us, Randy Gagning. What's going on, Randy?
How are you?
Doing quite well. We're enjoying all the services that Morse's provides. You guys have a big thing coming out today.
Yeah, this Saturday. On the 21st, we have our annual open house. Big sales, deep discounts.
Awesome.
A lot of the sales reps from all the manufacturers are there. It's a great day. We also serve burgers and for lunch, so it's a good fun day.
So as this is coming out, Saturday, you got to gear up. If you're in the New England area, probably go down, see Randy, see Jim, see all the great products they have. A lot of sales stuff, bringing in all the new stuff for the year, right?
Yeah, all the 2015 product is in. It's cabin fever month, so get out and check it out.
Which is what Jim was doing, Dusty, when we met up with him down at the ATA. He was picking out all that cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting the new lineup, freshen it up for the new year.
Oh, man. Well, I'll see you later on.
Sounds good.
All right, we're back with Alan Eaton. I want to get into a little bit about the tick. Like, if I'm a hunter, and this is kind of relating back to being out in the field, what am I looking for? Ticks, some of the bigger ticks, you can see them, but there's something other than that I'm looking for this black-legged tick that would kind of set my alarm off.
It's fairly easy to recognize, and actually, this in my publication, this mine is online, and there are various others where you can tell what it looks like. The adult females are a little distinctive in that they have, before they blowed up, they have this reddish orange color along with this very dark scutum and dark legs. That's why it's called black-legged tick. Whereas the adult males are all black, but the nymphs are kind of grayish. They're not quite as dark a color. The tip-off is the shape and size. So the adults are pretty easy to spot. They're 2 millimeters for the males and 3 millimeters for the females. Remember, there's 25.4 millimeters to the inch, so 3 millimeters isn't all that tiny. Whereas American dog tick, that one's about 4 or 5 millimeters long. That one's even easier to spot. But the nymphs are the tough ones, and they're only 1 millimeter. So turkey hunters, or people setting up did anybody set up trail cameras in May and June? You do that kind of activity.
Yeah.
Then that's a risk. June is a really risky time.
That's
so.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
Though, if say I have a tick on me and it's embedded, what's the best way to take it out or remove it so that you don't spread the disease or whatever?
That's a good question.
When I was a kid, I was taught you slather Vaseline on it or you touch a hot match to it, and the tick will let go.
I was going to say, I've done that, and they just stay there. They don't do anything.
And of course, when you look in my publication, one of the things we put in it was an electron microscope photo of the mouth parts of a black-legged tick, and it's barbed. There's like 40 or 50 barbs on it. They're rigid barbs. When that tick inserts its mouth parts in, it has to cut to get them in there. Then the first thing it does is it secretes cement to hold that in there. And then when it wants to remove the mouth parts, it has to scissor and dissolve that cement, and it takes a long time. So touching a hot match or slathering it with Vaseline or something isn't going to make it let go. When the tick wants to stop, it may take 20 or 30 minutes for it to pull out. So we worry that people that do the hot match trick or the Vaseline trick will actually, we don't know, but we speculate that the ticks might actually secrete spirochetes. You burn it, and in response, it secretes a little shot of saliva and spirochetes. So we recommend don't do that. Instead, you get a pair of fine-tipped forceps and remove it by grabbing it as close to the head as possible and close to the skin as possible and pulling it out the same way it came in. Or one of these little tick spoons. There's a fellow in Dover who invented, it's called Ticked Off. And it's a little plastic spoon with a little tiny V-shaped groove in it. And that's small enough, you slot those mouth parts right in it and put this right against the skin, and you can lever the tick right out. Some people love those little spoons. So one of those two ways to just make sure you get the head completely out, mouth parts stay in, that's not a problem so much. But having the head still there might be a little problem. And these two methods, the forceps or the little tick spoon, are the best way to do either of those. And please, no Vaseline or hot matches. You could cause a problem with those.
So wouldn't you know you got a tick problem when you're inventing a tick remover device?
I wish I'd had his idea. He came to me with this back in, in the early 1990s, and it's now you can find, they're little plastic things, you can buy them, and the hunting stores have them. And they're for some people they're really slick and easy to use. But the most important thing is just do it when you find them. If you try and remove it with your fingers aren't fine enough, and you really got to be able to grab hold of the head, which is very tiny. So the little bitty spoon with a slot in it can do that for you, or fine tipped forceps. And I have both, and I carry them with me, and I religiously do this. I'm waiting for the snow to melt. We've got 2 feet here in New Hampshire, and so I'm waiting for it to melt. And as soon as the snow melts and the temperature reaches 41, the air temperature is 41 or higher, black-legged tick is ready to go. In fact, we occasionally catch them. They're collected in January or February if we have a bare winter and it's a warm day. So as soon as we've got no more open spots and the temperature's 41 or higher, this thing will be active.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry, isn't that wonderful news?
Yeah. So, Dusty, I take it you haven't seen any of these tick spoons out in your neck of the woods.
No, that's nothing that hits the brain that I've laid an eye on in any of our retail outdoor stores anywhere here.
Gotcha. So, Alan, I wanted to talk about something, and Randy and I had talked about this a little bit. And we're obviously hoping that we had a knockdown in the tick population after Randy's experience that he had last year. And one of the things that Randy had said to me, he said, "I hope we have a really cold winter with no snow, because that would knock it down."
That's what I've heard, anyways. And
I think I'd start listening to him. That sounds like a good suggestion.
All right.
I've tried to educate myself on this stuff so it doesn't happen again.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? I mean, how do the actual climates affect, other than the brush and all that stuff? How do the climates affect deer or tick population?
The greatest mortality factor for ticks is drying out. If you remember that, then you understand why they're most common in thick brush and tall grass, because that's where the humidity is high for many, many hours of the day, and why an open winter that was cold would kill a lot of them, because they can't get cover. Right now, they're sealed in really well by that insulating thick layer of snow. I don't care how cold it gets outside. They're insulated underneath there, and it isn't the cold so much as it is the exposure to the drying that's the mortality factor. So that's why that's important. That also explains why humid areas have more problems than dry areas. It also explains why mountaintops, the top of Mount Washington, is not a likely place to go looking for ticks, whereas down in the lower reaches and along the rivers and so forth might be better. But the tops of the mountains, no way. So that's why.
Gotcha. I mean, this is an interesting thing you just said about the humidity. I mean, New Hampshire and New England in general, and you don't think about it like this, but at times of the year, it's probably one of the most humid areas in all of the country. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and when I have colleagues across campus from me that are doing remote sensing, and they're trying to put some of these things together so they can detect these things and predict what's going on by computer models. And back in an earlier iteration of my tick map, I've got the current one right here, but in an earlier form of this, the black-legged tick densities were highest in a band in our state that was about 20 to 25 miles thick along the coast, and then up a very narrow band along the Connecticut River, where there's lots of fogs, and up a narrow band along the Merrimack River, where there's lots of fogs. And so those were the kinds of situations where it was the highest, and certainly seemed to be tied in with humidity to some degree. Now the picture is a little more general. It's much more generally spread, and it's a little harder to see that. But a few years back, that was a little more obvious.
Gotcha. So one of the things that I've noticed over the years living where I live, and Randy and I talked about ticks more often than recently because of the situation that Randy got into, is that in my backyard, and it's an acre and a quarter, a backyard.
And what county is that?
It is in Merrimack County.
There you go.
Okay. And after the snow melts and the grasses start to come up, I start to notice a tremendous amount of ticks in my yard. I mean, you can't walk through the yard without being jumped on. And then a little bit after usually the first cut of the grass, they tend to just go away. I usually don't see them after that. And very rarely do I get a deer tick. It's usually some of these larger ticks that I get on. But
the black-legged ones.
Yeah.
The American dog tick.
Yeah, usually American dog tick will jump on you. But after the first cut, I don't get that much after that. And that's usually...
And that makes sense.
Okay. Why does that make sense? I'm trying to figure this out.
Two things going on. One is, of course, if you that particular time of year, late May and early June, that's a really good time when they're active. That particular species is active then, and many of them get their blood meals then and then drop out of sight and stop questing for hosts. The ones you and I see are the ones that are active. They're actively questing for a host. They're sitting on vegetation and waiting. The ones that are fat and happy, that have had their meal and are down in the leaf litter, we don't notice. So it's the proportion of the population that's most visible to us are the ones that are actively questing for hosts, and that just happens to be the ideal time for them. The second thing is that once we mow the grass and keep it short, keep it mowed, it's not at all good for their survival, and a lot of them die out. And so two factors leading into that particular situation.
Interesting. So as a homeowner with a nice yard, and Randy, you have the same situation, is there anything else that we can do as homeowners? And Dusty, you don't have the same density of ticks, obviously. This may not apply, but is there anything we can do besides mowing? I don't know, like yard guard or anything like that?
Is that stuff effective?
Is that effective? Should we be concentrating on this kind of stuff to keep the ticks off of our kids and our dogs and our pets?
There's a bunch of things you can do, and I've got a publication on the web, and Jay, I'll be sure to give you that link so you can go to the website and go to my video and the maps and the publications. I got a bunch of them. But basically, one is to manage to avoid tall herbaceous vegetation or thick brush. So pruning, mowing, things like that is one. Fencing out the thick areas that have thick brush so to keep people from going in them. Making trails wide and free of vegetation. Moving play equipment away from the wood's edges, sometimes also putting a barrier around them so they'd be in a bit of wood chips or sand or something like that. There's a number of steps you can do. You can go up from them. You can go up the next step. Some people may wish to consider an insecticide application. There are some that it's actually a carricide. It kills ticks. Early June is the best time if we're talking about black-legged tick. You'd be spraying the leaf litter and the lower 18 inches of the shrubs. One proper application a year, and the key word is proper, can knock the population way, way, way down. And sometimes if you have a really high population in the first year, you do 2 shots, and then after that, only 1. So some people might want to consider that. There's an option. In addition to those, and of course, there's for those people that like organic products, there's organic choices in addition to the synthetic chemicals. There's the tick boxes approach, which kind of limited usefulness of those. That's a little box with a fipronil reservoir in it, and you have to have a contract with a pest control company to do those, and there's only a couple of them using those yet. So that's new. There's also the so-called, what's the brand name? Tick tubes. Daminix is what they called it, which are pesticide-treated cotton tubes, and they're scattered. If you spread it the proper way, the idea is the mice find the pesticide-treated cotton, and they bring it back to their nest, and they line their nest with it. And then the ticks that bite the mice and then drop off the mice fall into the pesticide-treated cotton and die. So it kills the ticks on the mice and controls it that way. And we've had some areas of New England that have had excellent success with that approach, and some other areas that have had moderately good success, and a few spots where it really hasn't worked well at all. And I think it's partly the skill of the person applying the stuff. You've got to understand mouse behavior and put it in the right place. So those are amongst the steps you can do. My publication, which is about 12 pages, talks about that. A colleague down in Connecticut, Kirby Stafford, who's at the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station, has an 85 or 90-page handbook that goes into even more detail on how to do this stuff. He can tell a lot more in 90 pages than I can in 12, and he's done an excellent job and goes into more detail about what kind of things to put around the play equipment and how far to move it from the stone walls and things like that. So there's a bunch of things you can do in addition to checking yourself during tick season regularly.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So there's all kinds of, Jay, I'm convinced it's in your hands. And the same thing with our other friends that are out there bird watching or hunting or fishing or whatever. You can tremendously reduce the risk of getting one of these diseases. We haven't talked about babesiosis or anaplasmosis, which are also out there, or Powassan virus that are also spread by this tick. But you can tremendously reduce your risk or tremendously increase your risk depending on what you do. It's really in your control.
Gotcha.
And when you know about it, there's a couple of simple things, and the daily checks, man, that's really important.
Okay, so daily checks, super important, especially if you're a hunter, or even in your yard or whatever. But hunters in particular, especially turkey season, it sounds like that's kind of one of the
out
big
there
things.
Peak season.
Yeah, to me, that's the riskiest time.
Yep, and even as a deer hunter in the fall, you're not immune to collecting ticks on your stuff. I was coming down a hill during the deer season. It was not a particularly warm day, and I actually found a couple of ticks on my collar of my jacket.
And they're on the deer.
And they're on the deer moving.
Yeah,
around.
we picked 44 off an animal this last fall.
Wow.
And that was only in the area. We have a certain defined area of the neck we search. We don't search elsewhere. So just on that one area, 44 of them we removed.
Fascinating.
And I've removed as many as 3. The hunters aren't as patient in letting me check their clothing.
Right.
But I've removed as many as 3 from hunters' pant legs and things like that. And if we're talking about winter tick and moose, much, much, much higher numbers.
Okay.
But that's another story.
That's another show. Go ahead, Dusty.
What's a tick attracted to? What makes a tick come to you?
They're really well equipped. They don't come to you so much as they wait in an appropriate place and wait for you to come by. The black-legged tick doesn't have eyes. It doesn't need them. It operates strictly by feel and by its Howler's organs that can detect CO2 and a couple other things. Interestingly, when you handle a deer, when you go to drag it back, you have to be careful not to touch the glands down by the hocks there. You know, the darkened place on the legs?
Yep.
Right.
And that's one of the places that has this musky odor that deer use as a communication. They also have interdigital glands between the hooves, and these spread odor and mark trails, and they can smell. Well, researchers studied these odors and discovered that black-legged tick detects them too. And when the tick is walking through a test arena and it reaches a place where they've streaked this deer odor on the vegetation, the black-legged tick stops.
Wow.
And waits there. It's an arrestant. And so that's one of the behaviors that they have evolved to be in a spot that's really likely to encounter a host. So they wait there for you to come by, and some of them are lucky and some of them don't and die.
Wow.
And so most ticks don't make it. They die. But that's what happens. They do it strictly by touch. Once you touch one that's questing, they grab hold. And that's another thing we didn't talk about. I wear, for a lot of my field work, I wear 16-inch high rubber boots. And it's mostly to keep my feet kind of dry. But also, it's too slippery for most ticks to grab onto. And so because the way they're finding you is grabbing on. If you have wool socks or wool pants, man, that's really good. It's rough. It's really good for them to grab onto. They grab on really well. But if you have something super smooth, like a rain suit or rubber boots, they can't grab on. So the way they find you is by physically you come in contact with them, your clothing or your fur or feathers or whatever, and that's how they climb aboard. You have to touch them, and then they grab on and climb aboard and start finding a place to bury their mouth parts.
Gotcha.
And that's how I sample for them. I drag a cloth, and they get disturbed by the cloth. They grab onto it. And then I search on the cloth. That's how when you're sampling vegetation with a cloth, that's how you do it. And it's because they think it's a host. They grab onto what grabs by them.
Wow. It's fascinating. So I want to just check with you real quick, Alan, before we let you go on a couple of things. One is, I've always heard this, that having and raising guinea hens in your yard, they seem to have this affinity for eating ticks. Is there any accuracy to that one?
I've heard it repeatedly, and we've even seen it in catalogs where it's advertised. And I've searched really hard. I've searched the scientific literature in vain looking for an experiment that demonstrates this, and I have not found one. Of course, in order to prove it scientifically, it's a really difficult experiment that would take several years with multiple sites and a whole bunch of guinea hens. And I guess I've got time for a quick anecdote. A friend here, not far from the university, said, well, we've got a site. You want to start looking? And we were thinking of looking for a couple of companion sites, because you have to do one site that has guinea hens and one that doesn't, and compare it with, keep monitoring. And what happened was the foxes and coyotes kept gobbling up the guinea hens.
Well, that was my next thought, is that you have all these predators around that are just chomping at the bit. So it might be effective temporarily.
Another problem.
We hear this repeatedly, and I cannot find any scientific test that demonstrates it, but we hear it mentioned repeatedly, and it could be that it works, but it just hasn't been proven. Okay. So that's the way I have to answer it.
Okay. So there's this other thing I always heard, even as a kid, said that if you don't remove the tick correctly, that the head can get stuck in your arm, follow into your bloodstream, and go to your brain and kill you. So silly. But what can a tick's head actually get embedded in your arm and maybe even cause infection or anything like that?
Well, when you see that publication and you'll see the barbed mouth parts, it's that harpoon-like thing, which is the mouth parts are attached to the head. That's what gets buried in, but nothing else. It doesn't have the ability to go any deeper, and why would it do so? It needs to stay outside. It needs its mouth parts to be in. So we don't have any species here that can do this. Now, if you and I were talking in Panama, the answer is a little different. There is a tick down there that does have that ability to bury a little bit. It often goes underneath a toenail and in places like that, and it's a little bit different. I think it's a tick, or it's a close relative anyway. So, but here, no, that can't happen with the ticks we've got here.
All right, so there's no chance of having a tick's head lodged in my arm if I remove the tick.
Well, you could have the mouth parts, and of course they're attached to the head.
Right.
So if you remove it incorrectly and grab it with your fingers, it might break off, leaving the head and the mouth parts. But they're big enough that you should be able to see that. What happens occasionally is the mouth parts may break off inside. And I asked my physician, I said, should I, if they break off, I'm asked by people all the time. Now I'm going to ask you in my physician's office, do I worry about the mouth parts in there? Should I disinfect it? Should I put an antibacterial treatment on it? And he said, if you want to.
If you want to. All right. So that's
if you want to. If it makes you feel better.
Okay.
That was his answer.
Right. Fascinating. So, and I just want to reiterate this. So as hunters, as we're out in the field, and when it's Lyme disease season, so to speak, but it can happen all year round, but there's some seasons that are a little hotter than others. The first thing we should always do when we come back from the field is to check yourself for ticks. And one of the things I want to ask you real quick, and this kind of affects deer hunting because we're so sensitive about what smells we bring into the field with us. Are there tick repellents, bug sprays that you should be using during the fall that maybe don't have odor that you could use as a deer hunter?
I can't answer the odor question because I'm not sure. Deer in particular are famous for their ability to smell stuff.
Exactly.
We do have two different materials, it's actually several materials. One is an insecticide that actually is sprayed on your clothing. You take the clothing off and spray it. It's called permethrin, and they classify it as a repellent, but it's actually it's killing the ticks. And then there's several repellents, including DEET, that are effective, and they are options to use, and I cover them in not only the tick publication to which I referred, but I wrote another publication on repellents, and that's on the website as well. Okay. And so it explains more details. They are out there. Whether or not the deer can smell them, I don't know. I would suspect they might be able to detect the DEET and some of the other repellents that have to volatilize in order to work.
Right.
But the permethrin, I don't know. I don't know of anybody that's looked at that particular aspect.
Randy, Dusty, would you guys use either one of those bug spray during the deer season? If you're sensitive,
I treated my clothes with permethrin.
Okay.
Last year,
you
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Dusty, would you even consider that being a stand hunter for the most part?
Yeah. I'm going with yes or no. You know, you hear stories, and it's happening more often about the Lyme disease. You know, I don't know. That's a toss-up question, Jay. Right now, I don't. Right. But the future to come, possibility, yes.
I think we're all in agreement.
And that makes sense in your state, which has such a low level of Lyme disease compared to what we've got here.
Right. But we can all agree that during turkey season, we're wearing bug spray, no matter what. Even if it's not for the ticks, it's for the mosquitoes and black flies.
Or you're working in your yard, anything like that.
Anything.
Yeah, so DEET does prevent ticks from. Does it kill them, or is it like a preventer?
It's a repellent, and so it would be most effective to be used lower down. You know, ankles and lower legs and pant legs. You wouldn't need it elsewhere, but because most of the ticks you encounter are going to be down around ankle height. So you're using it down low. You use it a little differently than you would to defend against mosquitoes, for example. But it can be very effective, and there's various other materials. Some people are allergic to DEET, so they're very happy when picaridin became available in our state. And there's IR3535, and there's undecanone, and there's still others coming along. So there's a bunch of choices. They're out there, and that's why I wrote that publication.
Okay.
And can you give a reasoning why you don't feel a tick bite you?
Say again?
Like when you feel a mosquito hammer you, when a mosquito gets you, you feel it.
That's true, Dusty. I agree with you. Like sometimes
why don't you feel a tick when it bites?
Well, of course there's some species of mosquitoes where the bite is really painful. There's one called Aedes excrucians. You can guess that one's a little painful and biter. And there's others where the bite isn't particularly painful. Part of the reason is the mosquitoes, first thing is to inject saliva in that has to keep the blood flowing, and they've got to be able to feed in a short period of time. A tick takes a long, slow time to get in, to bury its mouth parts in. It may take 15, 20, 30 minutes to get its mouth parts in. And it's also injecting, along with its saliva, stuff to hide from your immune system and other things to keep the blood from clotting. So the fact that it's slowly getting in there, I think it's partly that it's so slow. Somebody who is a physiologist and could explain about nerves might know whether or not some of these things that the ticks secrete also dull the chances of the local nerves detecting the bite. That's a question I don't know, but that might I don't know the answer to that, but that might be involved as well.
You know, that explains a lot. You know, mosquito, when it it injects the saliva, and it's a needle basis going in on a quick scale versus the slow, and I understand that. Now, when you say the teeth of the tick or they got like a barb on them, explain that. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, if you'll see the hypostome, which is the thing, the harpoon-like thing they stick in you, has barbs. And virtually all of the ticks have barbs. In fact, they're one of the factors we use to tell the different species apart. how many rows and how many columns of barbs there are and what they're shaped like and so forth. And they basically are used to help hold the tick in position, because it's got to feed for several days in order to get its meal. And so it has evolved this defense to hold on really, really well and that's the barbs are used to do this. Now, farther inside, there's a pair of scissor-like things, the chelicerae, that can cut through tissue a little bit and get stuff in. That's a little bit different. But the barbs are these rigid things to which I referred, and they're barbed kind of like a fishhook, except lots and lots of. You look at the black-legged tick female; she's got 30 or 40 barbs on the mouth parts.
Wow!
A barb, I'm assuming that you can't physically see it with your eye.
No, they're much too small, but I can see them under the microscope, and that's why we used an electron microscope picture for that particular one. It's really, really sharp, has great depth of field, and they show up really well. So Nancy Shuram took that picture for us. We went over to Kendall Hall and took that, and it came out very nicely.
Okay, and I'm going to get a little more on the detail about, once you've come in contact with tick and the tick actually embeds itself with the bite, how long does it take for the tick to actually consume the amount of blood that it needs to, or how much blood does it need to be satisfied to release off the body?
And the answer varies with species and with stage. So if we're talking about a larva, a just hatched larva, hatched out of the egg, it was lucky enough to find a hatchling bird sitting in a nest in the ground. Maybe it's a ground-dwelling bird, and it's lucky enough to bite this thing. It only has to engorge with blood for maybe 1 or 2 days before it's fully replete. And then it pulls out and heads off to digest that meal, which takes weeks and weeks to digest. So a larva, maybe only a day or two. For a nymph, it might take 3 or 4 days. For an adult, I'm talking black-legged tick here. For an adult, it may take, for a female, it may take 5 or 6 days to fully get the blood. So the answer is different depending on the stage and the species.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Excellent. Randy, do you have any other questions for Alan?
I don't. I think we pretty well covered the preventative stuff was what I was really,
Cool.
trying to get for people.
And Dusty, do you have any other questions?
I don't, but I'm definitely going to say thanks to Alan bringing awareness, more or less than anything, the awareness of, especially up your guys' way, that it's something to take real seriously. And, with the disease that it's carrying and passing along. And it's something that can take your life. That's for sure. And it can really mess you up for a long-term factor. As a hunter here in Ohio, I'm going to take this issue a little more serious now than I have in past years and actually utilize the information that's available right here through listening and being right here talking that, it's something that, it's going to sink in, and we all as hunters need to realize that this is a serious issue.
Randy, how many days did it knock you out for?
Most of the summer.
Most of the summer,
yeah.
So 90 days?
Oh, yeah, 3 months.
3 months.
Anyways, and it was a slow healing process after that. I mean, it's within the last 2 months is when I've actually started to feel good.
So. Now you feel back to normal again.
Yeah.
Okay, so
it's a long
So you got bit when? In June?
Around 4th of July.
4th of July.
Yeah.
Several months of pain and just uncomfortable, just everything you can imagine.
Ugly.
Headaches.
Yeah.
Yeah, just aches and pains across your body.
Yeah, paralysis in your face. I mean, it's not fun.
And just 2 months ago, it was 8 months later, now you're just starting to feel back to the way you used to feel.
Yep.
Wow. And that could have gone worse.
Yeah.
Alan, I can't thank you enough for joining us on the show and just raising awareness about this. And I wanted to do this because Randy and I talked about this, that we really should have a show dedicated to Lyme disease just so people can listen to all the things, the preventative measures, the things you can do to reduce your risk. This has been a tremendous asset to all hunters that listen to this show, and I really appreciate you joining us, Alan.
Well, you're welcome. And I'm going to, after I hang up, I'm going to send an email your way with a link to the section of our website that has all these publications. Also, Health and Human Services in our state has just finished major prevention plan. I'm part of their project on tick-borne diseases, and we're expecting it will be announced sometime in the next days or weeks. And that is a rich source of information on all the various options. We're hoping it's going to be available to people. I can't give you the link yet because it hasn't been posted yet, but that's imminent. So there's lots of ways you can get information, and forewarned is forearmed is forewarned. You don't have to be a victim if you can protect yourself. You can still go out there and enjoy seeing. I'm thinking of those big Ohio bucks. Wow, you get to see them and see them on your game cameras and so forth. And if you know what to do to protect yourself, you can tremendously reduce your risk of getting any one of these diseases.
Very good. Alan, how can we reach you after the show ends? Is there a place that we can go to reach out to you if we have more questions or if our listeners have any questions?
In fact, I'll give you that website page where you can see my publications, and my email address is alan.eaton@unh.edu. And I'm gonna send you the link to the public health IPM page, which has the various publications to which I referred, and links to the Health and Human Services stuff. And eventually, when that tick-borne disease plan gets announced, I'll have a link to that as well. And there's all kinds of places to get information and help yourself and reduce your risk.
Beautiful, Alan. I really appreciate it. I know our listeners will appreciate this. Randy, you appreciate this.
Absolutely.
We've been talking about doing this show for a while. And Dusty, I'm sure you appreciate it as well.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks again, Alan, for joining us. And man, what great knowledge you have of something that a lot of us see daily while we're in the woods.
Yeah, keep doing the great work.
Thank you.
Keep doing the great work. Keep dragging those cloths through the woods, and keep bringing us great new data. Thank you, Alan, very much.
And I'll also put a link to the Deer Ked publication as well, a tick-like animal,
Okay.
a tick-like insect that occurs in New Hampshire, but not in Ohio. I'm sorry. And that's of interest. The hunters are really interested in that here.
Okay.
A lot of them think it's a tick that flies, but it's different.
All right. Well, we'll put all these links in our show notes so that everybody that's wants to know more before they push the play button will actually be able to click on these links and learn more beyond just
Sounds
listening.
good.
Excellent, Alan. We'll let you go.
Thanks for your interest.
Well, I appreciate it, and we'll
Great
talk.
storytelling on Alan's behalf.
Yeah.
I love it.
Nailed it, Alan. You nailed it.
Have a good evening.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Randy, Dusty, that was awesome. My head is filled with knowledge, and it feels
All
like
good
it's
information.
all great information.
Yeah.
I feel like it might explode because I don't usually take in that much data at one time. What do you think about this whole show, Dusty?
Oh man, I tell you, just in the language that Alan was able to break everything down and utilize all his factual, graphic information that he had right in front of me. It's amazing the knowledge that we learned about not only the ticks, but the Lyme disease and the preventive maintenance that we can do, and the time of years. You know, that's things that's overlooked real easy. But now it's available, and you can go back and listen and have that refreshed in your mind anytime right here on this podcast.
I love it because it's like taking a course in tick prevention or Lyme disease prevention and checking yourself for ticks. It's now we have a reference that we can always go back and listen to every year. You know, people are infected all across especially the East Coast, I'm sure from Florida all the way up to the tip of Maine, more in New England, obviously. But now you have something to go to. You can listen to it as somebody, not even a hunter, just people that are trying to prevent it in their own yard.
And it's all good factual, information.
Absolutely.
You know, it's going to solve a lot of the myths and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
And there are myths out there.
quite a few.
You know?
Yeah.
The thing about the head getting stuck in your bloodstream, killing you because it floated to your brain, that was one of them I wanted to know. And the guinea hen thing.
Yeah, you hear that a lot,
Right.
but also, removing a tick, everybody Vaseline, matches.
Yeah, matches.
It's not the way.
If I've been bit by one and I tried the match thing, stupid thing stayed right in my arm.
Yeah.
Vaseline.
Now you know why.
just kind of made my whole arm like petroleum jelly because the tick was still there. Dusty, you ever been bit by a tick?
I've never had one seeded in. I've been lucky. Really, I've found them crawling on me. It seems like the just luck of the draw that they hit the right hair that I feel that they're crawling. I've seen other people. I've actually found a few ticks on other people. Like, man, you got a tick behind your ear. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah, and right there at their ear, you would think you would feel that. But the information that Alan passed on is that unlike a mosquito, a tick slow bite is kind of goes unnoticed.
It does. I've had neighbors that had ticks go in their ear, and they had to go in and get them removed.
Ew! Wow.
I've taken a shower the day after I was out in the woods and found one under my armpit. I was like, what is that? And you look up and it's a tick, and it freaks you out.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They're gross. Yeah.
I've been pretty much itching the whole show.
Pretty much. I hate bugs in general.
Yeah.
There isn't a bug I love. Except for maybe a praying mantis or something.
Ticks are just worse. They're just creepy.
Ticks are just yucky. So this show is dedicated to trying to reduce the tick population down as far as we possibly can, and hoping for those cold, dry winters from now on, basically.
We got to shout out to Randy for taking time out of his night to set in with us and share his experience that he had with a tick.
Well, I really wanted to do the show with you anyhow to prevent, it's just
spread the word.
Yeah, absolutely.
Spread the word out there. Help people try to avoid the same situation that you went through, because you went through hell.
I was naive, and there's a lot of other people that don't take it serious, and I didn't, but I do now.
It's a great way to give back after experiences, to share your experience with everybody else and try to help them from not going through that same thing.
Yep.
Randy, I'm going to ask you a quick question. What do you do today that different that you didn't do before the tick incident?
I mean, I always, I would shower every day anyways, but now I do a tick check every day, every day. And more so in the summertime. I'm really going to be diligent those peak months of May, June, July. I will be very diligent.
And getting your kids to check themselves, too. We're helping your kids check.
Your pets are carriers.
Absolutely.
They bring them in the house. So
I'm sure Sasquatch, your pet coon cat, brings them in all the time, right?
Long-haired, cat, anything like that. So and they sleep with your kids. So you need to check them.
Right. I find them crawling on my bed.
Yeah.
When we had a cat that was outside. Yeah, same thing.
But, the big key, like Alan said, they've got to be on you for a couple of days,
right?
To transmit. So if you can catch them in that period.
Right. And it takes time for them to actually bite you. It's not like a mosquito where they land and they bite.
It's not instant.
They have to kind of crawl around and creep around like the creepy things that they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when you're not expecting it, slowly engage, probably when you're sleeping and not moving.
Yeah.
And that's when it all happens.
Very slow process.
Yeah. Well, I'm psyched Alan joined us, and I'd like to just give a quick shout-out again to our donation club members from this past week. Jim Keller, Griff Botte, and Chris Hunsberger. Cannot thank you enough from the bottom of our hearts for donating to the Big Buck Registry and helping us spread the message that hunting is good. Bottom line, hunting is a good thing, and we want to continue to spread that message and get more people involved in the great outdoor sport that we all enjoy.
Absolutely. Thank you to everybody.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, Randy, how can we find you over at Morse's Sporting Goods?
I'm there pretty much 6 days a week.
Okay.
And if you give us a call or shoot us an email, you'll be able to get in contact with me, no problem.
Cool. So if I have a bow that needs some tuning up, or if I want to buy a brand new bow, you're the guy that we're going to turn to over at Morse's Sporting Goods.
Yeah, you'll be dealing with me. Yes.
Awesome, man.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
Randy, I'm going to clutch to Randy for the tip of the week. This time of year, Randy, everybody's kind of put their bow to the aside.
Mm-hmm.
Give us some 3 of your top pointers for storing your bow in the off months.
You got to be careful of cats. They like to chew on strings. So the best thing you can do is put the thing in a case, and put it away. But make sure that it's good before you put it away, because you don't want to pull it out, a couple weeks before the season to find out there's something wrong. Because a lot of your shops, including myself, we're super busy that time of year, and we're going to try our hardest to get it back to you before opening day, but it may not happen. So it might be worth taking a few shots with it before you put it away. And, wax up the strings and check for loose screws and all that stuff. So, all that stuff will save you time when the season comes around.
That's a great tip.
Awesome tip. That's the Chubby Tines tip of the week. from Randy Gagne at Morse's Sporting Goods. So, Dusty, how can we find you outside the show?
Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. You can also send me an email right here at the Big Buck Registry, and that's bigbuckregistry.com/Dusty. Jay,
Awesome.
how can the people reach out to you at the Big Buck Registry?
All right, Randy, you ready for this? Because this is long-winded.
Oh, boy.
It is long.
Really long, right? All right, first and foremost, we would like to invite you, if you are not on an iTunes ready device, you can join us over at bigbuckregistry.com/iTunes, and please leave us a review if you're listening to the show. That's the one thing I'd like to ask everybody. If you listen to the show on an Apple device, please, please, please leave us a review. And you can subscribe for free. It's totally free to listen to all our shows and listen to our entire back catalog. We did launch a brand new channel this week, which is the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting video series, where we do our trailers for the shows, and Dusty might do some of his shed hunting videos. They're all going over there. And you can find that at bigbuckregistry.com/video. On Twitter, twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. Facebook page is facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. You can give us a call at 724-613-2825. If you would like to share a picture of your big buck and get presented to 155,000 plus followers and be famous for a day, go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and you'll see all the instructions right there. And if you are in the outdoor industry and you have a Facebook page and you would like a little bit more promotion, we're not going to be doing this as much anymore, but if you still have an outdoor venue that you would like to get a little more coverage for, and we haven't shared you yet, we'll do a share for share with you if you meet our qualifications, and that's www.bigbuckregistry.com/S4S. And I think that's it. Did I miss anything, Dusty?
No, you did very good. Big buck everywhere.
Big buck.
We got some exciting news coming up that we're going to be launching in April. That's something that you don't want to miss.
Huge.
It is huge.
Edge of your seat kind of stuff. Yeah, but we can't even tell you what it is yet. But stay tuned. April 1st. Huge.
And it's not going to be an April Fool's joke. We're not doing that to you.
Not a fake one. This is a real deal. So
yeah, it's going to be awesome, and it's something to look forward to, and it'll be happening real soon. Hey, I'm Dusty Phillips.
And I'm Jay Scott.
And I'm Randy Gagne.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Deer Hunting Podcast. See you next week.
Can't wait.